The tension was palpable the moment Mona and Emanny stepped into the Joe Budden podcast spotlight, and what started as a heated discussion quickly spiraled into chaos. Listeners tuned in expecting insights, debates, and maybe a few jaw-dropping revelations, but nobody was prepared for the explosion that followed. Voices were raised, points were interrupted, and the back-and-forth quickly became a full-blown clash of egos, leaving the core topic buried under a storm of accusations, personal jabs, and heated comebacks. Social media immediately lit up. Clips went viral, and fans were divided, some rooting for Mona, others for Emanny, but everyone shocked at how fast the conversation derailed. What was supposed to be a focused conversation about their perspectives and experiences instead turned into a spectacle, exposing raw emotions, hidden grudges, and unfiltered opinions that had been simmering behind the scenes for months. By the end of the podcast, the debate that was meant to clarify issues left listeners more confused, entertained, and stunned than ever. This wasn't just another argument, it was a viral moment in podcast history, the kind that sparks endless commentary, memes, and debates online. And as fans dissect every clip and every word, one thing is crystal clear. The Mona versus Emanny showdown isn't over, and the internet is already buzzing, waiting to see who really won this explosive, unforgettable podcast clash. As soon as the microphones were rolling, the tension between Mona and Emanny was unmistakable. Even before the first question could fully land, Mona's sharp tone cut through the air, making it clear she wasn't here to play nice. Emanny, ever composed on the surface, but clearly simmering, didn't back down, responding with a measured, yet unmistakably biting retort. Listeners could almost feel the sparks flying through their headphones, the kind of sparks that make people lean in closer, even when they know a storm is coming. Joe Budden, the host, tried to steer the conversation back on track multiple times, reminding both women and the audience that the purpose was to discuss their perspectives, experiences, and the bigger picture. But every attempt to moderate only fueled the fire. Mona had a point she wanted to make about personal accountability in relationships and social media narratives, but Emanny was determined to challenge every assumption, calling out inconsistencies and questioning motives. The debate quickly morphed from a discussion into a full-blown showdown of personalities. Every comment Mona made was dissected and amplified. Emanny countered with precision, using examples, experiences, and subtle digs that left Mona momentarily speechless. It wasn't just words anymore, it was a battle of influence. Each had a following waiting online, and every slip, pause, or misstatement became a viral soundbite before the podcast even ended. Social media users immediately began clipping, reposting, and debating who was winning the argument. Threads erupted on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, fans choosing sides and replaying the moments that shocked them the most. As the discussion intensified, Joe Budden found himself in the impossible position of mediator, referee, and commentator all at once. Mona's frustration grew as she felt her points were being overshadowed by Emanny's sharp comebacks, while Emanny's patience began to fray as she saw what she considered to be misrepresentations of facts. There was no subtlety left. Every sentence had an edge, every pause carried tension, and every sigh or chuckle was loaded with meaning. It became clear that the original topic, whatever insight or lesson was supposed to come out of the podcast, was already getting buried under layers of personal rivalry and unsaid grievances. Past disagreements and behind-the-scenes drama began creeping into the conversation, turning it into more than just a podcast episode. It became a public airing of long-held frustrations and ego clashes. Fans could feel the raw emotion leaking through. The mics, Mona accusing, Emanny defending, and both revealing sides of themselves they rarely showed in public. Meanwhile, clips of the argument began trending almost immediately. Fans debated who had the stronger points, who was more in the right, and whose composure cracked first. Memes were created, reaction videos exploded on TikTok, and Instagram Reels captured the most intense moments frame by frame. People were shocked not just by what was said, but by the energy, the timing, and the undeniable chemistry of conflict that only amplified every word. The internet was alive, dissecting the conversation, and the podcast episode had become a cultural moment in real time. Amid the chaos, Joe Budden did what he could to remind both women and the audience about the bigger picture, that it wasn't about personal attacks, but rather perspectives, opinions, and the context behind their discussion. But Mona and Emanny were locked in a battle that had gone beyond rational debate. Past loyalties, professional reputations, and personal pride were now intertwined with every sentence, making it nearly impossible for Joe to redirect the energy without it spilling over into even more explosive moments. By the midpoint of the podcast, the original conversation topic had become almost unrecognizable. Listeners weren't just tuning in to hear discussion, they were witnessing the raw, unfiltered collision of two strong personalities. And while some argued that the points made by either side had value, many agreed that the spectacle itself, the tension, the interruptions, the sharp comebacks, was the true draw. The episode had become a case study in how personality clashes can overshadow intended discussion, showing just how powerful social dynamics, ego, and history can be when two people with a lot at stake finally have the floor together. Despite the chaos, both Mona and Emanny also offered moments of insight. Occasionally, when emotions subsided for a brief second, listeners could hear genuine reflections on experiences, thoughts on accountability, and observations about industry pressures. These quieter moments hinted at the depth behind the conflict, suggesting that underneath the public clash were real experiences, differing perspectives, and the complexities of their personal and professional journeys. But those moments were fleeting, often drowned out by the next verbal jab or pointed rebuttal. As the episode drew toward its conclusion, it became clear that this wasn't just another podcast argument. It was an unforgettable moment in real-time commentary culture. Mona and Emanny had transformed a simple discussion into a viral event that would dominate conversations online for days, maybe weeks. The episode left listeners with mixed feelings, admiration for their courage to speak honestly, shock at how heated it became, and anticipation for what the next interaction might look like. Even after the microphones went off, the aftermath of the clash continued to ripple. Fans dissected every clip, debated who won, and speculated about whether this was the start of a long-term feud or just a one-time explosive encounter. Social media commentary ranged from supportive to critical, but everyone agreed on one thing. The episode had cemented itself as a moment that would be talked about in podcast circles and online communities for a long time. And that's exactly the kind of content that makes the Joe Budden podcast a must-watch for those who crave raw, unfiltered conversations. Mona and Emanny's clash wasn't just an argument. It was a cultural moment that revealed the power of personalities, the influence of social media, and how quickly a conversation can evolve into a viral spectacle when two people refuse to back down. As soon as the episode ended, social media erupted. Clips of Mona and Emanny's most heated exchanges were everywhere. Twitter threads, Instagram reels, TikTok compilations, all dissecting the moments when tempers flared, voices rose, and interruptions cut through the conversation like knives. Fans were taking sides immediately. Some backed Mona, claiming her points were clear, concise, and backed by real experiences, while others supported Emanny, praising her for defending herself and refusing to let anyone dominate the conversation. Hashtags like hashtag Mona vs. Emanny, hashtag Joe Budden Podcast, and hashtag Podcast Clash started trending in multiple countries within hours. The reactions weren't just from casual listeners. Industry insiders, fellow podcasters, and influencers weighed in, offering their takes on what had gone wrong or right. Some argued that Mona had overreacted to minor comments, while others insisted that Emanny's rebuttals crossed a line into personal attacks. Commentators highlighted how Joe Budden's role as a mediator had been challenging, walking the line between facilitating discussion and letting the chaos unfold naturally. Clips showing Joe raising his hands to calm both sides became memes, with captions like, "When the host knows he can't save you," flooding social media. Meanwhile, the tension behind the scenes didn't disappear when the cameras stopped rolling. Sources close to the podcast revealed that production staff were scrambling to prevent any further escalation. Emails flew between the team and the guests, urging them to consider the public impact of their words. Mona reportedly felt vindicated but exhausted, while Emanny was described as energized yet frustrated at the misinterpretation of some of her points online. Private discussions between both women and Joe Budden suggested that there was still potential to reconcile, but neither side was willing to appear weak in front of millions of eyes. The controversy quickly spread beyond the podcast community. Fans created reaction videos with dramatic captions, overlaid the audio of the most intense lines, and paired it with slow-motion zooms on Mona's and Emanny's expressions. TikTok users turned the confrontation into a short-form narrative, inserting background music to heighten tension, while Instagram comment sections filled with debates over who had won and whose arguments carried more weight. The episode had transcended its original platform, becoming a digital spectacle across multiple social networks. Back on the podcast, the dynamics of influence and perception became clear. Analysts noted that the clash demonstrated the power imbalance that can exist when two personalities with strong followings converge. Mona, with her direct communication style, came across as assertive and unwavering, while Emanny's strategic approach made her seem both calm and intimidating. Together, they created a perfect storm, a collision of energy, influence, and past experiences that amplified every word spoken. Even without intending to, both women had engineered a discussion that blurred the line between conversation and performance. Fans also started examining the content of the argument itself. What had begun as a discussion about personal experiences and perspectives had evolved into a debate on credibility, accountability, and public perception. Each participant used anecdotes, past experiences, and subtle references to previous interactions in the industry to strengthen their points. For example, Mona referenced professional encounters with mutual acquaintances, while Emanny cited experiences with mentorship and behind-the-scenes knowledge of media. Influence. The depth of their argument was often overshadowed by the high energy of the delivery, but for viewers who listened carefully, it was clear that every line had meaning, context, and weight. Joe Budden's moderation became a secondary story. Clips showing him trying to interject, asking both women to slow down, or redirecting the conversation quickly went viral. Fans praised his patience, but also questioned whether he could have done more to prevent the verbal sparring from escalating. Podcast hosts from other platforms weighed in, offering their strategies for handling heated guests. Many agreed that the episode served as a case study for managing conflicting personalities in high-stakes discussions, when egos, reputations, and millions of social media eyes are involved. Every word matters. Beyond social media, brands and sponsors took notice. Some sponsors reportedly sent private messages expressing concern over the confrontational tone and potential backlash. Yet, ironically, the conflict also drew massive attention, increasing downloads, views, and engagement numbers. Analysts predicted that the episode would break previous records for the podcast, showing that controversy, if controlled, can be a powerful engagement tool. However, the risk of damaging long-term relationships with both guests and audiences remained. The fan debates often centered around key moments. One clip, where Mona's voice cracked mid-sentence, was replayed endlessly, with some interpreting it as emotional authenticity and others as a moment of weakness. Another clip featured Emanny's pointed counterarguments, delivered with calm intensity, which sparked conversations about the effectiveness of composure versus raw emotion in debates. Fans compared these moments across social platforms, creating polls, discussion threads, and even collaborative video breakdowns analyzing tone, word choice, and timing. In the days following the release, the podcast became a cultural touchstone. Social media influencers, YouTubers, and content creators produced reaction videos breaking down every nuance. The clash sparked conversations about gender dynamics in public debates, the pressures of social media visibility, and the psychological impact of being put in a highly visible, confrontational setting. Comment sections were flooded with reflections, opinions, and personal stories from viewers who identified with either Mona or Emanny, creating a broader conversation beyond the entertainment context. Inside the industry, conversations shifted to strategic lessons. Hosts, producers, and managers began discussing the balance between authenticity and control. Many noted that while conflict drives engagement, it also risks alienating audiences if not carefully managed. Mona and Emanny's clash became a case study in how personal history, professional rivalries, and social media amplification can intersect to create explosive content. Observers agreed that the episode highlighted both the power and responsibility of public figures when participating in high-stakes conversations. Meanwhile, speculation about a potential reconciliation between Mona and Emanny fueled more engagement. Clips of post-podcast interactions surfaced, both showing mutual acknowledgement, slight smiles, or even brief nods during interviews or social appearances. Fans interpreted these as either signs of resolution or subtle acknowledgments of lingering tension. The ambiguity kept audiences invested, eager to see the next chapter unfold. It's evident that Mona and Emanny's clash wasn't just a momentary spark. It had a ripple effect across social media, industry analysis, and fan discourse. The discussion became more than a debate. It became a lens through which audiences explored relationships, respect, influence, and accountability. Both women, whether intentionally or not, had created a defining moment in podcast history, one that would be dissected, discussed, and remembered for years to come. Even weeks after the podcast aired, the ripples of Mona and Emanny's clash were still being felt. Clips were still circulating, reaction videos were still being posted, and debates continued in the comments sections. Some fans were still taking sides, while others were reflecting on the larger implications, how conflicts are amplified in the age of social media, and how personalities, reputation, and influence collide in the public eye. Behind the scenes, both women were processing the impact in very different ways. Mona reportedly spent time with close friends and mentors, analyzing how she could have handled her tone and delivery more effectively. She recognized that while her points were valid, her intensity sometimes overshadowed the substance of her argument. Meanwhile, Emanny was assessing how her calm, measured delivery had been interpreted as calculated or dismissive by some viewers. Both women realized that the public perception of an argument can be completely different from the intent behind it. Budden also reflected on the episode's fallout. As the host, he had walked a fine line between keeping the conversation flowing and preventing it from devolving into chaos. In interviews after the episode, he admitted that he underestimated how much the clash would resonate online. He praised both Mona and Emanny for their honesty, but acknowledged that he might have intervened more to ensure clarity and reduce misinterpretation. The episode sparked a larger discussion about podcast dynamics in general. Media experts noted that the Mona-Emanny clash highlighted the risks inherent in high-stakes discussions where personalities, social media influence, and fan bases intersect. It wasn't just about entertainment, it was about accountability, perception, and the consequences of every word spoken. Podcasts were no longer isolated conversations. They were public performances, amplified to millions of viewers with the potential to impact careers, brands, and personal relationships. Fan engagement didn't slow down either. Social media threads dissected body language, tone, and phrasing. Memes were created showing split-screen comparisons of Mona and Emanny's expressions. Viral TikToks re-edited their most dramatic exchanges, and YouTubers produced deep dives analyzing the cultural context behind the conversation. Every minor gesture, eye rolls, hand movements, and tone shifts was scrutinized, with fans debating intent, authenticity, and confidence. Amid all the drama, some reconciliation attempts began to surface. Both Mona and Emanny attended a Houston media event weeks later, where they were photographed in the same space, exchanging a brief handshake and nod. Though brief, the interaction sparked discussions across fan communities. Some interpreted it as a truce, while others speculated that the tension had not fully dissipated. Interviews with industry insiders hinted at ongoing communication, mediated by mutual acquaintances, suggesting that both women were committed to repairing professional and personal respect, even if the rivalry remained a talking point. The podcast team also used the experience as a learning opportunity. Staff debriefed about how to manage high-tension episodes in the future, creating clearer protocols for pre-episode discussions, on-air moderation, and post-episode follow-ups. They recognized that while controversy drives engagement, it must be handled carefully to avoid unnecessary reputational damage for guests and the platform. In terms of career impact, both Mona and Emanny saw benefits and challenges. Mona's assertive approach solidified her reputation as unapologetically direct and confident, attracting new fans who appreciated her honesty. Emanny's calm, strategic delivery drew admiration from those who valued composure and analytical skill under pressure. Both saw a boost in followers, podcast listens, and social media engagement, though they were also confronted with the downside of heightened scrutiny and polarized audience reactions. Critically, the clash became more than just an episode, it became a cultural touchstone. Analysts noted that it illustrated the evolving role of women in media, the impact of digital amplification on personal disputes, and the importance of communication in high-profile settings. It also highlighted the ways in which long-standing personal histories, differing communication styles, and social expectations can clash in very public forums. Industry insiders observed that the episode had sparked broader conversations about podcast ethics and responsibility. How much should hosts intervene? How should guests prepare for the amplified scrutiny of millions of viewers? How do audiences differentiate between performance and genuine emotion? The Mona-Emanny clash became a case study, frequently cited in panels, workshops, and articles discussing digital media, influence, and public perception. Months later, reflections from both women and Joe Budden suggested growth. Mona discussed the importance of measured communication without losing authenticity. Emanny emphasized strategic clarity and being mindful of audience interpretation. Joe highlighted the responsibility of hosts to manage high-energy personalities while maintaining engaging content. Collectively, they framed the episode as a learning experience for everyone involved. Finally, the clash's long-term legacy is evident in how fans, creators, and media professionals approach podcasts today. High-tension debates are no longer just entertainment, they're educational opportunities in communication, audience engagement, and reputation management. The Mona-Emanny episode illustrated the delicate balance between passion and professionalism, authenticity and perception, and controversy and resolution. In conclusion, the Joe Budden podcast episode featuring Mona and Emanny remains one of the most talked about moments in modern podcast history. The clash showcased the power of personality, the influence of social media, and the complex dynamics of public discourse. It taught lessons about preparation, communication, and perception, while leaving fans debating, discussing, and dissecting the fallout months after it aired. Ultimately, it's a reminder that in today's digital age, every word, gesture, and expression carries immense weight, and that conflicts, even when intense, can spark reflection, learning, and growth for everyone involved.